Hello, all. Good afternoon. Welcome back for the final day of our workshop. Uh, a quick summary of what we have discussed yesterday. Yesterday, we continued with decision tree. We talked about the disadvantages of decision tree and advantages of decision tree when we prefer to go with a decision tree versus when we prefer to go with a ensembling. We introduced the concept of ensembling, and within ensembling, we discussed one approach. That approach is called as bagging, which is bootstrap aggregation. It's actually a part of sampling method called as resampling method. And based on that resampling method, a new algorithm called random forest is available for us. So we saw how a random forest works yesterday. At the end of the day, there were a few questions. Especially, there were a lot of questions on metrics for classification and also metrics to understand confusion matrix. So today, first, let me start with those metrics, because to understand how good these models are, especially when we build a classification model, how good these classification models are, you need to know these metrics very well. Otherwise, it's a little difficult to interpret the models. So let me spend around 15-20 minutes to explain what confusion matrix is and what these metrics that we are talking about. Then we will move to our next topic, which is boosting. Actually, boosting is a very heavy topic. Time is not sufficient enough to really cover every aspect of boosting over here. So I will just introduce you to a very high-level introduction to the boosting. So anyone who is really interested to pick from there and interested to learn on their own, they know what needs to be done, what are the concepts that they need to focus on. Okay. So yeah, with that, with no further delay, let's start with the confusion matrix part. When we build any model, especially a classification model, how do we know whether the classification model is doing a good job or not? Basically, the typical metrics that we use, something like, let's say, accuracy. What is this accuracy? How are we computing this accuracy? Let's do that. We have Y, which is on the test data set. On the test data set, we have both X and we also have Y, which is a vector. So we have Y, which is the actual. Since it's a binary classification, Y will take values mostly like 0, 1, 0, 1, or S, no, right? So it can be either in the form of S, no, or 0, 1. We always represent our predictions using Y hat. So Y hat is the predictions that we are getting from the decision tree. And you know how we are getting the predictions, right? So we start with the tree, we end up with one of the leaf node. And finally, what is the majority class in this leaf node? That is what we are going to predict. That's my prediction for this particular observation here. Let's say our predictions are something like this. Now you make a comparison between these two, predictions versus actuals. If both predictions and actuals are same, that means they are correct records. We predicted them well. This we predicted well. This we did not predict well. This again we did not predict well. This we predicted well. This we did not. So accuracy is simply, out of all decisions that we have made, how many decisions were correct? So in this case, we have made 7 decisions. So total out of 7, how many decisions we have made? We have made 4 decisions. Sorry, correct decisions, 4 correct decisions. So our accuracy is simply 4 out of 7. There's a problem with the metric like accuracy. Sometimes in the binary classification, we may have our target distribution like this. Most of the values are zeros. and very rarely you see a 1 for very rare diseases. Imagine if you are dealing with healthcare data and you are trying to deal with very rare diseases, something like Parkinson's or whatever it is. You don't generally find a lot of people with these type of diseases. So when you predict people with these type of diseases, most of the people will have no disease, and very rare you would see some people with diseases. So you would have very less ones and more zeros. So at the root node, just for the sake of argument, if we start with 900 people with no disease and 100 people with diseases, yes. At the root node itself, it is like 90% no and 10% yes. So these type of data, we call it as imbalanced data. Imbalance means there is no balance between both the classes. One class is like way too high. This is like 90%, and the other class is just only 10%. So that's the imbalance that we are talking about here. With these type of imbalanced data sets, accuracy can be misleading. Why it can be misleading? Just look at this scenario. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. I'm predicting all zeros. And how many times I am right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 11 plus 3, around 14. Out of 14 times, I made correct decisions almost like 11 times. So the accuracy says, hey, you're 11 times right out of 14. That makes us think, okay, fantastic. We are doing an amazing job, almost like roughly around 80%. But look at this. Wherever the person has disease, all the instances we did not predict anything. It's just like blindly giving all predictions as 0. Why do you need a model for this? You can simply say everybody is not going to have this disease, and your predictions are still 80% right. It's like a multiple choice exam where you simply don't read the question paper at all, answer all of them as B, and still score 30 out of 100 or 35 out of 100 and claim that, hey, I have passed the exam. That's stupidity, right? You did not even read the question paper. So similarly here, we just give predictions blindly as 0. Nobody is having this disease. Everybody is not having the disease, right? This doesn't make any sense. So this is called as predicting negative versus predicting positive. What is predicting negative versus predicting positive? Predicting negative means predicting a 0. Predicting positive means predicting 1. So now we are in a pandemic. Everybody know what positive means. Everybody know what COVID tests are. If someone is tested for COVID, if they have COVID, they would say, hey, you tested positive for COVID. That's like a prediction, right? May not be a prediction, it's actually a diagnosis, but positive means the person is having disease, negative means person is not having disease. So similarly here, predicting 1 means event is going to happen, predicting 0 means event is not going to happen. So in the world of data science, we call them as event, non-event. So event means it's going to happen, non-event means it's not going to happen. So predicting a positive is more important than predicting a negative. So if you predict 100 people and say none of them are going to have some disease like cancer, you are 95% right. But there were 5 people who had cancer 1 year down the lane. You did not predict them well. But the 95 people who did not have cancer, you predicted all of them as not going to have cancer. You can still claim that your accuracy is 95%, but it's of no value. Why it's of no value? Negative predictions has no value. Positive predictions are important. If you have correctly predicted those 5 people who are about to have cancer 1 year down the lane, that would have made more impact. That would have made more sense. Why? you might have told those 5 people, hey, you are at risk of having cancer. Maybe for the next 1 year, you need to be in observation. Every month, we will try to take some readings or scans. You can start some pre-medication. Don't eat these foods. Be very careful. So it could have been easily cured, even if it turned out to be cancer 1 year down the lane. But since you said none of them, out of the 100 people, none of them are going to have cancer, they did not pay any attention. 1 year down the lane, when they were diagnosed with cancer, it might be too late, right? So that's why in the data science world, the positive prediction has more impact, but negative prediction has no impact at all. So we would not pay attention to how many negatives we have got right, but we would only pay attention to how many positive predictions we have got right. So to avoid this scenario, instead of using this accuracy, we would use something called as a confusion matrix. So what is this confusion matrix? Confusion matrix is a 2x2 table. Okay, it's called contingency tables or frequency tables. Just like how you have these two variables, y hat, we are going to aggregate this into a 2x2 table. That's like y. Y is nothing but your actuals. Y can take 0 and 1. Okay, let me draw it in a different one. Okay, so let's draw it here. We have y, which is actuals, and we have y hat, which is predictions. Y can take values like 0 and 1. Similarly, y hat will also take values like 0 and 1. Now, we would try to summarize this, let's say using this data. This is y hat, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. Okay, for now, let's say this is also 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0. So let's see how to summarize this. When actual and prediction both are 0, that means it will fall into this quadrant. So let's divide this into a 4x4 quadrant, right? Actual is 0, prediction is also 0. How many instances were there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 instances. So let me put 5 over here. When actual is 1 and prediction is 1, that should go into this quadrant. There were no instances. So let me put a 0 here. When actual is 1, prediction is 0. So that's 3 instances. This one, this one, this one. When actual is 0 and prediction is 1, there is no prediction 1 in this case. So again, this is going to be 0. Okay, so that's how this confusion matrix is kind of like populated. Now from this confusion matrix, we derive additional metrics. Those are called as precision, recall, F1 score. First, let's look at precision. Precision is true positives divided by true positives plus false positives. Recall is true positives divided by true positives plus false negatives. F1 score is 2 into precision into recall divided by precision plus recall. So these are the formulas. But what are these true positives, false negatives, etc.? Now let me explain that again with this confusion matrix. Predicting a 1 means positive. predicting a 0 means negative. So just remember that in mind. Predicting 1 means positive, predicting 0 means negative. Now, if we predict a 1, that means we are predicting positives. If actual is also 1, that's called as true positives. We predicted a positive and it turned out to be true. So that is this quadrant, true positives. We predicted a positive, but actual is negative. So we predicted a positive, actual is negative. So we are actually talking about this quadrant over here. Then it is called as false positive. Now come to this. We are predicting negative. So in this row, we are predicting a negative and the negative is true. Prediction is also negative, actual is also negative. So that's why the name true negatives. We predicted a negative, but the actual one is a positive one. So this is simply false negative. So that's how this confusion matrix is populated. Now you know what each quadrant means. The reason why a lot of people struggle with this, and it is aptly named as confusion matrix, is no matter how many times you listen to this, you still don't know what false positives, what false negatives means. That's the reason why the precise name confusion matrix. It takes some time to get used to this, but if you listen to this repeatedly, if you read about this again and again, it becomes slightly easier, slightly clear. Okay, so I have a small example which we can easily remember what this is. Let's say we are predicting rainfall for the next 10 days. So day 1, let's say this is day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7, day 8, day 9, day 10. These are my predictions. Y hat. I'm giving my predictions today itself, right? So on the first day it will rain, on second day it will rain, on third day it will not rain, on fifth day it will not rain, sixth day again it will rain, and the remaining days it will not rain. So these are my predictions. So every day you observe whether it has rained or not. This is actual. It did not rain on first day. It rained on second day. It did not rain on third day. It did not rain on fourth day. It did not rain on fifth day. It rained on sixth day. It rained on seventh day. It did not rain on eighth day. These are the actuals. Now, keeping this in mind, when we predict rain, those are positive predictions. So that means we made 3 positive predictions. So these are 3 positive predictions. Okay. And remaining all are negative predictions. So let me put a minus so that it will be slightly easier. Don't get confused between N and that. Okay, we made 3 positive predictions. Now look at this. Is our positive prediction true? We made a positive prediction, but it did not happen. So this is going to be a false positive. We made a positive prediction and it happened. When we made a positive prediction and it happened, it's called true positive. We made a negative prediction and it is true. So that's like it's true negative. This is also true negative. This is also true negative. This is again true positive. Why? We made a positive prediction and it is really true. We made a negative prediction, but it rained. So this is our false negative. And here again, it's true negative, true negative, true negative, right? So that's how, if you try to understand the concept behind these definitions, it would make more sense. Now, what's the importance of these 3 metrics? Just observe those 3 metrics. As per this data, we made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 decisions, and we are right 5 times, except this one, we are right 5 times. So our accuracy says your 5 times right out of 8 times. But we summarize it the same into a confusion matrix, right? So this is our confusion matrix. Now from this confusion matrix, you try to derive these metrics. Precision, true positive divided by true positive plus false positive. That's like 0 by 0, infinity, undefined. Okay, leave that. Recall is true positives 0 divided by 0 plus 3. This is 0. F1 score 2 into 0 divided by 0. Recall, which is definitely going to be 0. So this is also undefined. Look at these metrics. They don't make any sense at all. If we have made some positive predictions, then these metrics would have made more sense. Now let's assume that this is 0, this is 0, this is also 0. Accuracy says you are good 5 times out of 8, but these metrics says it's pathetic. They are not at all useful. Look at these 3 metrics. They are purely based on how many times you are right with respect to positives only. So true positives divided by true positives plus false positives. That's precision. How precise you are. When you say something, how many times you are really true. That's what precise means, right? So precision is out of positive predictions that you have made, how many times it is true. Recall, out of all events, like there were 3 events, out of these 3 events, how many did you predict? You did not predict anything. So recall is also 0. So similarly here, out of all events, event means out of all rain days, there were 3 rainy days. How many did you predict? I predicted only 2 of them. And here it rained, but we did not predict. So in this case, our recall is going to be 2 by 3, right? So that's how important these metrics are. Precision, recall, and this is nothing but a harmonic mean of precision and recall. We call this as F1 score. So these are the metrics that we use to judge if our model is, especially the classification model, is doing good or not the accuracy. But just for simplicity, and we actually build any model, we simply go with accuracy as our first check. But that should not be the right metric to assess if your classification model is really doing a good job or not. You should pay little more attention to the positives alone. And that's the reason looking at confusion matrix and from the confusion matrix, coming up with these metrics, precision, recall, F1 score are more important. This is what we use in the real world, not the accuracy. Okay. I hope someone asked this question yesterday, and I felt it's very important. Yeah, for multi-class classification, yes, we can still do that, but it's going to be slightly tricky. So for multi-class classification, what happens is A, B, C. These are your predictions. There is no concept of positive, negative. No, it would be slightly different. Let's say here also A, B, C. So these are your actuals and these are your predictions. So now it would be like a 3 by 3 matrix. Okay. When you are computing for precision A, you will treat A as positive and remaining ones as negative. So for precision, let's say you treat A as positive and remaining ones as negative. So it's like, again, summarizing it into a 2 by 2 matrix where A, other, and A, other. How many times you have correctly predicted A as A? That becomes your true positive. How many times you have predicted other as other? That becomes your true negative. And this one will become, let's say, this one is your false positive, this one is your false negative. So this is for A. And similarly, you do it for B and you do it for C and then average out. So that's why it is called as the median F1 score or the mean F1 score, right? That's how you do it for multi-class classification. There are many approaches, but this is probably the easiest of approaches. So you compute precision with respect to A, with respect to B, with respect to C. You compute recall with respect to A, with respect to B, with respect to C, compute FN score, and then average them out. So that you get the FN score average of across all the three classes. Okay. Fine. Now, with that, let's get back to our original discussion where we were talking about boosting, our next ensembling technique. In bagging random forest, we learned about, we have a data set, and from this data set, we create multiple bags at a time. So this is like, let's say, bag. And for each bag, you build a tree, T1, T2, T3, T4, T5. And then we just aggregate them, either by majority voting or by averaging them out. Okay. But in boosting is a sequential process, where random forest, you can call it as a parallel process. What parallel process means here is each tree is independent from each other. There is nothing. So while you have these bags, tree 1 is learning from this bag, tree 2 is learning from the other bag. Tree 1 and tree 2 are totally independent from each other. So that's why we say this is a parallel process. But whereas boosting is a sequential process. So what is this sequential process? Let's illustrate with a small example first. Let's say we start with a data set. And here, let's first start with AdaptBoost, which actually stands for adaptive boosting. We don't use adaptive boosting these days because of a lot of limitations it has. A modified version of it, which we generally call as the GBM. This is the gradient boosting machine. This is the most used boosting technique. Of course, there are much more advanced boosting techniques like XGBoost, GBM Lite, KetaBoost, etc. I said that's why I said boosting is like an ocean. There are like too many topics in it, and we would not be able to complete all of them. We would just take only one of them and see how boosting works behind the scenes. What's the fundamental thought process behind this concept called as boosting? Then implementation of that will vary from one algorithm to another algorithm. But for all of them, to start with, adaptive boosting is probably the earliest of them. Thanks to Trevor Hasty. I think he is the one who converted this from adaptive boosting to GBM, which is the classical approach that we all use for boosting these days. But to begin with, let's say we have some data and we build a model. Let's say that is a tree, and we get this model as an output, M1. It can be, for now, let's assume this is a tree-based algorithm, CART, right? We have data, we pass this to a tree-based algorithm, and it generated a model M1 for us. This model M1 has, let's say, a accuracy of 70% and a error of roughly around 30%. 1 minus accuracy is your error. So if your accuracy is 70%, then error is going to be 30%. This is not good enough for us. We would want to improve on this. So how do we improve this? From this data, we would select a sample, another subsample. We don't call this as a sample, but we can call this as a subsample. And we have this subsample data, and we pass this to another tree, and we generate this model M2. But how do we select this subsample? That's all where the difference is. While we select this subsample, we give more weightage to the data points that are wrongly predicted by your first model. Let's say we have 1,000 observations. Now, when your accuracy is 70% means 700 observations are correctly predicted, 300 observations are wrongly predicted. Now, when we are selecting the subsample data, we will give higher weightage to these 300 observations and less weightage to these 700 observations. Why so? We want these observations that were wrongly predicted by its previous model get selected into this, and we do not want all of these 700 observations that were rightly predicted by its previous model into this subsample. So higher weightage makes sure that these observations has more chances to be part of this sample. Lower weightage for this means they have less chances of trying to be in this sample. Now, on this subsampled data, we build another model M2, and let's say this has an 80% accuracy and an error of around 20%. Now we have two models, M1 and M2. Now, how do we combine these two? So in the case of random forest, because it is a parallel process, each tree is independent from each other, we can simply aggregate them using a voting process or by using a averaging method, do something, right? But that's not going to be the case here. We cannot do voting, or we cannot do the aggregating here. The reason is they are not really independent from each other. So model 2 is dependent on model 1. How it is dependent on model 1? The error of model 1, the error records of the model 1 is the driving factor in building the model 2. So that's why you cannot simply say, hey, let's add these model 1 and model 2. You cannot, right? So in this sequential process, once we build a model, we would add the models M1 plus M2. And still it is not done. M2 has some error. We want to improve on it. So what we do is we take another subsample data. We pass this to tree. We would get another model M3, and we will add these models M1 plus M2 plus M3. Of course, not like this. There will be some weightage. Let's say A1 into M1, A2 into M2, A3 into M3. What these weights, A1, A2, A3, we will have to learn. It will be based on the accuracies of these models. Models having higher accuracy, model having higher accuracy on overall data, not just on the training data, will be given higher weightage. Models that has lesser accuracy will be given lesser weightage. Like this, we can build n number of models. Let's say we build 100 models. And every time we build a model, we add the model to the previous set of models, M1, M2, M3, so on up to M100 with their corresponding respective weights. And that is going to be our final model. Okay. Now, I know this becomes very clumsy. This is slightly more difficult to understand. First, let's look at a visualization which explains this process. Then we will come back and try to look at this and try to see how we can derive these weights, what are the approaches of deriving these weights, and why so many different algorithms. Okay. Now let's look at this example visually. Here we have this data, which is kind of represented in this form. Let's say this is X1, this is X2. It should not be Y, it should be X2, because Y is a notation that we use for target, not for input. So for that differentiation, let's use this as X1 and X2. There are 3 points which are red here, something like that. And there are 5 points that are of different color. Let's say something wrong with this. So to differentiate the class, we are using both the combination of color and the combination of points as well. So there are like 2 more points, which is like 0 and 0. Okay, these are the original observations. So 5 observations that belong to 0 class and 5 observations that belongs to 1 class. The positive ones are 1 class, the circles are the 0 class. Now let's build a decision tree. Now what is a decision tree? Decision tree would start with all these 10 observations here, 5 observations that belong to 0 class and another 5 observations that belong to 1 class. And using a rule, let's say the rule is x1 less than 2. That's the rule, x1 less than 2. And you would get some observations this side and some observations this side. Based on the majority, you would assign, okay, this is a positive class and this is a negative class. Let's now pictorially see that over here. If I draw that x1 less than 2 line with a dotted line over here. So this is the dotted line. Now x1 less than 2. So this is the classification that happened. These 2 observations came here and these 8 observations came here. And these 8 observations, we are predicting them as positives. So these observations, though they are red in color, we are going to predict them as positives. And these 2 observations that are just below this line, which ended up in this node, we are going to predict them as negatives. So how many mistakes we did? This is correct. This is correct. These 5 are correct, but we made a mistake with these 3 observations. So these 3 observations are now wrongly classified. But let's try to modify that. Now we will take the same observations, but we will give more weightage to these 3 which are wrongly classified. So that is why they are shown in bigger circles here a little bit. And then these observations, remaining observations as it is. Now we build another classifier. So this time our classifier is going to be like this: x2 less than or x2 less than 4. And that's our classifier. Now what happens? This is the line x2 less than 4. So we are going to predict these 4 as negatives and all the other observations, including these 2, all of them as positives. So 6 observations we are going to predict as positives, and these observations we would be predicting as negatives. So let's say this we will predict as zeros, okay? And the remaining ones we are going to predict as positives. How many mistakes we did right now? We predicted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 correctly, 1, 2, 3. 3 are wrongly predicted by model 2. So this is model 1, this is model 2. Now, if we combine both of this model 1 and model 2, that's like drawing this line and this line together. Then on this side, we will predict them as negatives. On this side also, we will predict them as negatives. And anything in this region, we will predict them as positives. So how many will get wrongly classified? Only one, only this observation. So that's the whole point of this boosting. Adding more and more models. So look at this. Another one more model we can add. So let's say I draw another line which separates them. Now adding more and more models are separating these things into minor areas. And each of these minor areas correctly predicting some of these classes. And finally, when we combine these 3 separation. So these are the three separations, right? So this is the combined model of M1 plus M2 plus M3, which correctly classifies most of the observations that are present in our data. So that's the whole point in boosting. So to give you an analogy, let's say you attempt an exam and you scored some 70 marks in the first attempt. But 70 is not good enough, but I want to force you to learn. So I will say, hey, we will probably give the same questions that you had in the question paper. So you go prepare again, come back. So in the next time, I will select some questions that you have wrongly answered in the first attempt and select very few questions that you have rightly answered in the first attempt, combine them and set question paper 2. Now in question paper 2, because you went back again, learned, you know that the questions that you saw in the question paper are going to come again. You prepared well for those questions. In the second attempt, you are going to slightly make a better answer. At least for some of the questions that you answered wrongly previously, you would try to correct them. Now, the combination of the marks that you scored in first attempt plus the combination of the marks that you scored in the second attempt is your final score, but not like adding. Let's say there is a weightage, 80% weightage to your first attempt score, 20% weightage to your second attempt score. So combine this, you would get your final score. So this combination of two attempts has improved your learning. You know how to answer some of those questions better. And also it improved your overall score because we are not just blindly going with your first attempt score itself. We are taking your first attempt score and you are taking second attempt score also. So that is why the name boosting. Simply speaking, boosting is a combination of weak learners. Each of these trees, look at this tree, this particular line, it's a weak learner. It rightly classified some observations, wrongly classified some observations. This is another tree. It rightly classified some observations, wrongly classified few observations, right? So each tree is a weak learner. And we are trying to combine these weak learners together to get better judgment out of the combination. And by adding them, by sequentially adding them, right? Now, I hope listening to this, going back to this would make more sense. That is what we are trying to do. We have some data, we trained a tree, and we got M1, which is the model 1, the first line that separated negative and positive observations. We were not completely accurate. We made some mistakes. Now we selected those observations which were wrongly classified by the previous model, given higher weightage so that they get selected into this newly created subsample. And we passed that again to a tree algorithm. It built a different tree now. So the different tree is nothing but this line. Okay. Now this tree has a different set of predictions. Now we can combine these two models, M1 plus M2. Of course, there will be some weightage, but the combination of these two models will give you slightly better accuracy, slightly give better decisions. And finally, you have one more sample. We have taken one more sample, given higher weightage to the observations that were wrongly classified by both these models, and take some correctly classified observations from these both the models. And we built another model, another tree-based model. And finally, that combination of the three models that we have, which is going to give us much better decisions than the individual model, right? So that is why this is called as a sequential modeling. Okay. So because it's a sequential modeling, we cannot aggregate it just by averaging it or routing. We need to combine them. So to combine them, we would add those models together. So far, what we have discussed is the adaptive boosting. AdaptBoost, or in short, we call it as AdaptBoost, but the more technical name is the adaptive boosting. So the name adaptive boosting means we are trying to adapt the model to perform better on smaller and smaller, narrower subsamples. As the subsamples are getting smaller and smaller, our models are trying to learn on smaller subsamples to make those corrections on the smaller subsamples. And finally, when we try to combine all of them, we need to make sure that the collective models put together are going to give us better decisions than the individual model. Okay. Let's see if there are any questions. Feel free to post your questions on the chat window. So far, so good. Okay. Now let's talk about the gradient boosting machine. It is built exactly on top of adaptive boosting like this. And to add to that, how do we combine these models together? That's the biggest question that we are going to have. It's not so easy. So to combine these models together in GBM, they use a loss function and an optimization method to reduce this loss function. So these are the true additions for your GBM. One is the loss function, and the other one is the optimization to reduce the loss of the loss function. Okay, when the weight will be added? Very good question. The way it will be recomputed every time we are going to add a model. First one is just M1. When we only have model, we only have model M1. Then when you have built model 2, we would have to add model 1 plus model 2. And of course, the weights has to be relearned for both of this. Then we have model 1 plus model 2 plus model 3, the combination of model 1, model 2, model 3. And these weights will be relearned, right? So every time you add a model, you would be iterating to see what weight makes more sense. And the combination of these models' accuracy, you would keep a track of it. Okay, when model 1 only was there, it was 70%. Model 1 plus model 2, it increased it to 73%. Sorry. Model 1 plus model 2 plus model 3, it increased it to 76%. Model 1 plus model 2 plus model 3 plus model 4, it increased it to, let's say, 78%. It will keep going up, but only to certain extent. After that, even if you add more models to it, it would not increase. Instead of increasing, it might start to decrease also. So that is the point where you stop. Okay, no more models. So that's called as iterations, which we will talk about in the next slide. Okay, so how many iterations you have to perform is decided by parameter tuning. Like this, I can keep building models 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, but I should know where to stop. We keep adding one model at a time and look at the overall performance of the combination of the models. If the overall performance of the combination of the models is increasing, then we keep going. But if the model performance started to stabilize or don't increase any further, that is where we stop and say, hey, we have reached the maximum accuracy or whatever the maximum metric that we can achieve, and we will stop there. Okay, Okay, some of the people are saying the screen is not clear. So let me just clean this out. Instead, I will pick this one, which is much more cleaner to start with. So for this, we use a graph. The graph would be something like this. So on this graph, we will have iterations on x-axis and metric. Let's say the metric that we would choose is error. When we have only one iteration, that means only model 1, model 2, model 3, model 4, all the way up to model 100. When we have only one model, let's say our error is at 30%. That's what we wrote, right? Model 1 will have a accuracy of 70% and a error of 30%. Model 2 will have an accuracy of 72% and error decreases to 28%. So your model will, as we keep adding more and more models, your error will keep decreasing until some point. After that, there won't be any decrease. It kind of flattens out. So this graph would look something like this. Now you look at this graph and say, hey, after this point, let's say this is at model 70, there is no further decrease in error. Even if we keep adding our models, it's just going to be a flat line. So we would stop at this point and say, hey, this is the best error. Maybe it reduces it to 10%. Now look at our single model error. The single model error was something around 30%. After sequentially building around 70 models, we were able to reduce the error almost close to 10%. That means our efficiency, the accuracy has increased to 90% and error has decreased to 10% at model number 70. Anything further, 71, again 90, 10, or there is not much decrease after this. And that's where we say, hey, up to model number 70 is good. So we will train the model only up to 70 iterations and we will pick our final model. M is equal to model 1 plus model 2 plus model 3 all the way up to model 70. Okay. Some of them are saying the pointer size is very small, maybe for the learners who are on YouTube. I will try to see if I can increase the pointer size. Okay, I did increase. Now let me draw something. I hope that would be more clearly visible to all of you. Next is GVM. In GVM, the main agenda of the GVM is on top of this adaptive boosting. Of course, we are going to add models like this, model 1, model 2 plus model 3, so on up to model M or model K, whatever it is. But we have to learn these weights. What weights makes more sense? Let's say alpha 1 M1 plus alpha 2 M2 plus alpha 3 M3, so on up to alpha MK. Alpha K, MK. What are these weights? No, at each iteration, it is still going to be a decision tree, not a different algorithm. So that's why I represented in the previous example when I was explaining using this one. Each one is a tree. They are not like different ML algorithms. Each algorithm, each time when you create a subsample, you are going to use a tree to train it. Okay, that's why these are tree-based algorithms. They are not being trained on other type of algorithms like linear regression or logistic regression, if you are aware of them. Okay, these are purely tree-based ones. Okay, we can combine if we want to, but that will be more complex. We don't want to get into that complexity. So to learn these weights, we would have to use a loss function, or it is also called as a cost function. We have to choose a loss function or a cost function. And we need to have a optimization technique. What is this optimization technique? An optimization technique that will try to find out the best values for this. So that is where GBM is like more powerful. If we are going with regression, we can use a loss function called as RMSE, root mean squared error. If we are going with classification, so this is for regression. And if we are going with classification, then we can use log loss or negative log likelihood. So these are some of the known cost functions, or you can use cross entropy, so many of different cost functions. So this is where math would get little more heavier and we need to learn them slowly. And on the optimization side, at this stage, we would not make things more complex. We would go with an optimization technique, which is called as gradient descent. But it's not the only optimization techniques available. There are so many different optimization techniques available. Something called as stochastic gradient descent, momentum stochastic gradient descent, RMS prop, a whole bunch of optimization techniques. But in most of the GBM implementation, it is the gradient descent. So that is why the name gradient boosting machine. Okay, now let's see what this loss function is and what this gradient descent is with an example. Okay, the whole of machine learning revolves around these two main concepts. Okay, one is the loss function, the other one is the optimization. Yeah, I am going to explain again, don't worry. So let's say we have X and we have Y. X is something like 5.1, 6.2, 5.4, 5.6, 5.9, 6. Y is, let's say, 56, 79, 69, 72, 74, 73. This is our X and Y. Imagine we have to predict we have to predict Y using X. So we have to predict Y using X. So I can explain the relationship between Y and X like this. Y is equal to some weightage W0 plus W1 into X. So I'm representing Y with this equation. So I can write this as 56 is equal to W0 plus W1 times 5.1. 79 is equal to W0 plus W1 times 6.2. 69 is equal to W0 plus W1 into 5.6. 73 is equal to W0 plus W1 into 5.9. 74 is equal to W0 plus W1 into 6. I can write this. Now, I want to find out the weights of W0 and W1 in such a way that if I substitute those weights, these values will be very close to these values. Ideally speaking, it should be equal, but we would never be able to find a weight that is exactly going to give us these equations. We want to find out these weights in such a way that these weights will give us these values as close as possible. Now, how do we say as close as possible? That is where a cost function comes into the picture. Now, let's say the cost function, we rewrite this in a slightly different way. 56 minus W0 plus W1 into 5.1 is equal to 0. And similarly here, 74 minus W0 minus W1 into 6.0 is equal to 0. So this should also be minus 9. Okay. And similarly, all these equations. When all these equations gives exactly 0 for a weight of W0 and W1, that means it's perfect, but we would not be able to find that out. So what should be the other solution? Other solution is, if we sum these difference, that should be equal to 0. But if we sum this, it can be negative or positive. So we don't want to avoid, we do not want them to cancel out. So instead, we are simply going to say this minus whole square, this minus whole square should be equal to 0. Now, can I write this as 56 minus W0 plus W1 into 5.1 whole square plus 79 minus W0 plus W1 into 6.2 whole square plus so on for all the other equations. 74 minus W0 plus W1 into 6.0 whole square. This whole equation should be approximately equal to 0. That means if we find values of W1 and W0 in such a way that this whole equation value comes to 0, then that's the perfect values of W0 and W1. So this is called as the cost function, and this cost function is called as RMSE, root mean squared error. So we are trying to take the difference between the actual and this one, squaring them up and summing them out. So that is why the name root mean squared error. If this comes to 0, then we would, if we find out values of W1 and W2, so that this whole equation value becomes 0, that's perfect, but it might not be possible. So we need to find out the values of W0 and W1 in such a way that this whole equation takes the minimum possible value. If not 0, the minimum possible value. Now, how do we find the values of W0 and W1 so that this whole equation has a minimum possible value? We need an optimization technique. Optimization means finding the optimistic values of W1 and W0 in such a way that this constraint is satisfied. And what optimization technique that we have to use here? It is called as minimization. If you remember maxima minima in calculus, how to find out maximum minimum. So minimization is what we are going to apply here. So to apply minimization, what can we do? We can take the first order partial derivatives of this equation, equate that to 0, and find out the values of W0 and W1. That's a calculus approach, slightly easier approach. It is workable when you have only two unknowns. But in GBM case, when you build 100 models, you might write 100 models as alpha 1 W1 plus alpha 2 W2 plus so on, alpha 100 W100. You have 100 unknowns. It's practically impossible to have 100 derivatives, 100 partial derivatives. So for W0 and W1, I will first derive this equation with dou W0 and again the same equation with dou W1. Then we will get two equations. If we solve these two equations, I'll get W0 and W1. But that's not the possibility here. So instead of going with this approach, what we are going to go with is the gradient descent approach. Now, what is this gradient descent? So this is our W0, this is our W1, and here we are going to plot the different values that this cost function will take. Let's randomly initialize W0 and W1. Let's start with W is equal to 0 and W1 is also equal to 0 and substitute those values here. We will get some value. So when W is equal to 0 and W1 is also equal to 0, the cost function, the third axis is nothing but the cost function. The cost function has took the value of something like this, whatever it is, okay? And the shape of your cost function would look something like this, like a inverted parabola, okay? And this is the minimum possible value for this cost function, and that is observed at this value of W0 dash and this value of W1 dash. This is what we want to find out. At what values of W0 and W1 you would see the minimum value for this particular cost function. And to do that, what we do is called as a gradient descent optimization. So the gradient is nothing but the derivative of this cost function at a particular value of W0. So this is like dou by dou W0 of this, and at the same time dou by dou W1 of this. So the gradient tells us which direction the minimum value is, whether to move in this direction or whether to move in this direction. If it is W1, we would try to move in this direction. For W0, we will try to move in this direction. So the gradient tells us which direction we have to move. And for the next iteration, W01, W11, so this is the first initialization, and we found the gradient. So for the next step, we would simply say W0 at first iteration is equal to W0 at zeroth iteration minus or plus the gradient. So this is one approach. So we are going to change the value of W0 by the gradient times so that we will slowly reach this minimum point. But there is a problem here. It's called as when you are rapidly decreasing, what happens is maybe for first iteration you find it here, for next iteration you find it here, for next iteration you find it here. You would be keep toggling here and there, but never reach this minimal point. So to avoid that, we use something called as a learning rate. and we control the decay. We control the path that we travel here using this learning rate. So W naught for the next iteration is equal to W naught at its previous iteration plus or minus the gradient times, which we represent as delta, into the learning rate, which we represent as lambda. Learning rate should be small, generally something like 0.01, 0.1. When we take smaller learning rates, our step sizes would be like very small. So we would slowly take steps to reach this minimal point. At some point, we would find this minimal value. Any further change to W0 and W1 will increase the cost function value. We will stop here and say, hey, we have reached the minimal point. If you take a very large step size, something like, let's say 1, we might jump faster, and by doing so, we might skip this minimal point and jump from here to here. So to avoid that scenario, we choose a very, very small learning rate. So this is called as the gradient descent approach. So we combine these two approaches. One, the cost function, a loss function, which we will try to minimize, plus the gradient descent optimization to find out the weights for each of these models. And that is why the name gradient boosting machines. I know this is a very high level, very fast, quick summary. I said 2 hours is definitely not enough for a topic like boosting to go little more in depth in detail. If I start derivating all these things and see how this really works, it could be even more challenging. That's the reason I just want to at a very high level explain what these optimization methods are. Maybe you would really want to go little more in detail to understand what gradient descent approach is, how these derivatives work. If possible, I will try to post a video purely on this gradient descent approach sometime, so that anybody who is more interested to know how it works behind the scenes with all the calculation, including the derivatives, so that you can refer to that video to learn more about what happens behind the scenes in the gradient descent optimization. Okay. For now, I think this is good enough. So at a rough high level, we are going to build multiple models, one after the other, one after the other, one after the other, and we start combining them at each stage so that our overall error keeps decreasing, and at some point it gets stagnated. We stop at the point and say, hey, we are done. No more training. Even if we try to train any further, it's not going to decrease our error. And that's what I represented it in this particular graph. To begin with, first model, our error is very high. Then first model, second model, our error slightly decreases. Then add another model, error slightly decreases. Then add another model. So as we keep doing this, the error keep decreasing only to some extent. After that, it would get stagnated and it would not decrease any further. And that's where we stop and say, hey, we have done enough. No more playing with this. Even if we try to reduce this, it will not make much of a difference. Okay. Let's pause here, check if there are any questions. Okay, then let's see the example, then we can come back here again. On the same data, let's now run a gradient boosting one. Because we are building a classifier model, we are calling gradient boosting classifier. I am naming this as GB. We will not change anything except for the random underscore state. We will fix this. Then we will come back and look at all the other parameters. gb.fit. By this time, you might have been very familiar with all these steps. X underscore train, that will not change. And Y underscore train. It will take some time. Okay, looks like it's fast enough to train. Let's see how many iterations it has trained. 100 iterations, and learning rate by default is given as 0.1. Okay, now let's see how this model predicts. We can just take this and instead of RF, it will be gb.predict. Okay, accuracy score is pretty good enough, 0.961. But let's play with the parameters. That's more important. In ensembling, the main role as a data scientist that you have to do is the parameter optimization, hyperparameter tuning. What are the best parameter values where you get the best results? So since this data set is not complex, you would be able to see the results very fastly, very quickly. Now let's say I start with number of estimators is equal to 10. I don't know where to start with. I'm just randomly starting my number of estimators is equal to 10. Is that good enough for the model to learn from? No, it might not be. The accuracy is slightly less. Look at how many errors that we are getting over here, and also let's add those metrics from sklearn.metrics import precision score, recall score, F1 score. And we will also add those three metrics here so that we know how good is your model, not just by looking at the accuracy. Precision is this. Precision underscore score. For all these functions, we pass actuals and predictions. Recall, F1 score, look, all the metrics it printed. Accuracy was 0.911. Look at F1 score. F1 score is only 0.57. Recall is only 0.4. So what we have to really optimize for is not the accuracy, it is the F1 score. F1 score is definitely looking much small over here. So that's why I said, don't just jump in joy because you have seen an accuracy of 90% and say this is good. It might be because you are predicting a lot of negatives, right? Not predicting the positives. If you are predicting all positives, right, then your F1 score should also be like very, very high. Now let's try to iterate this around by increasing the number of estimators 10 at a time, and let's see how the model performance improves. It drastically improved. F1 score jumped to 0.73. That means we are going in the good direction. Precision 0.98, recall is 0.58. Let's see if we can change this any further. Let's take 40 and see how good the training is. 0.829. Okay, very good. Let's try with 50. 0.844. Okay, fine. That means at number of estimators is equal to 50, we have seen decent model performance. Next important parameter that we would have to worry about is this learning rate. Now let's say I change the learning rate to 0.5. Purposefully, I'm changing this to 0.5. 0.849. So having a higher learning rate means your training process is going to be faster. And sometimes it is counterproductive. The main thing that we have to first balance is number of estimators and learning rate. So the general thumb rule is your learning rate should be inverse of your number of estimators. So that means if your learning estimators is 100, then your learning rate should be like 1 by 100, which is like 0.01 or something very close to that. If you take smaller number of estimators and give very high learning rate, that's counterproductive. Your model would not be able to learn. Okay, so let me show you pictorially how learning rate impacts with the same number of iterations. It's difficult to draw all these graphs on a monitor. Okay, this is your estimators. This is your error. So learning rate lambda is equal to 0.1, 0.01, sorry. Look what happens. For faster learning rates, you would get to this error faster, but takes less number of iterations. For slower learning rate, you might still be able to, but the decay could be very, very large. So that means you need more number of iterations to reach this. So that's where learning rate and your number of iterations should be like inverse. If you are decreasing your learning rate, that means you have to increase your iterations. So these are all the knowledge that we need to possess as a data scientist, right? Everybody can write these small pieces of code, but the more the knowledge that you have about all these parameters and how these parameters work in sync so that you get the best model out of it, that's the knowledge that you need to see as a data scientist. So that's where we would be spending a lot of our time iterating again and again, learning about each parameter. You don't have to go anywhere. So built-in documentation is more than enough to understand each of these parameters, right? But for boosting and for random forest, it's the number of estimators that's more important parameter. For boosting, it's both the number of estimators and as well as learning rate. For higher learning rate, if you are not able to really get good results, then decrease the learning rate, and at the same time increase the number of estimators. So first to strike a balance between these two, even before you look at the other parameters. Other parameters, some of them are already familiar with to us because these are all tree-based methods. All the tree-based parameters that we have learned in the previous sessions, they are applicable for boosting techniques as well. Look at max depth. Max depth, we know how far the trees can grow, and we are controlling the growth of the trees to 3. We are not allowing the trees to grow as far as possible over here. The default value for max depth is equal to 3. And the strong reason for that 3 is, in boosting, we want the trees to be as small as possible. All of these are weak learners. And when we combine them together, that's where they make better and strong decisions, right? So we do not want the trees to overfit at all. And boosting is certainly more prone to overfitting, very highly prone to overfitting. So that's why controlling all of these makes more sense for us, right? General learning rate range is 0.1 to 0.0001. That's the general learning rate, right? So you can see here in the documentation, learning rate, by default, it is 0.1, but you can change it. So there has to be a trade-off between learning rate and estimators. Learning rate, if you decrease, you need to increase your estimators. If you are decreasing your estimators, then you need to increase your learning rate, vice versa. They are like inverse relationship. Number of estimators, max depth, minimum samples in the leaf, which we discussed yesterday again, right? So all these parameters are very similar, except for these two, especially one is the learning rate and the other one is number of estimators. Loss is deviance. Because it is a classification model, the default loss is deviance. We can also use error. Deviance actually computed using a log equation. So that's why I'm not going to go deeper into this. So you can simply consider this as error. So as the error decreasing, that means your training process is improving. So the last function that is used is deviance. Okay, and then we have one. Let's look at one more parameter. Number of samples in leaf, which is similar. Max features should be there. Yeah, max features. So you have max features, and this concept is again very similar to the random forest max features. You do not want to use all the variables in every split point that you are going to make. You want to use the sampling of variables, not try all the variables when you are trying to split at any sample at each level, and use those sample of features to split further. Okay, so that's by default set to none. That means it is allowed to use as many features as possible, but we can restrict it. Let's say we can restrict it to 50%. Like if you have 15 variables, you might set this to somewhere around 7 or 8. So this is called as the parameter optimization. So finding out the best combination of your parameters so that you get the best possible result as an output is the main goal as a data scientist that we have to do. For smaller exercises like this process would be like pretty faster and easier. But for bigger data sets, when we are trying to build very complex models, this process itself would be like taking a very long time. The main advantage of going with these ensemble techniques is they are very powerful. They can beat the individual models easily. So this is the order of efficiency in terms of achieving results. First, you have um, you have boosting. Boosting is the best one. Then your random forest. Then the simple bagging. Then the individual models like decision trees. Decision trees are good, but they cannot give you exceptional accuracies. Boostings are perfect. They can give you exceptional accuracies. The disadvantages for ensembles is they are difficult to explain. In case of a decision tree, when we built a decision tree, we can simply look at the tree and explain how we ended up with this node, and these two splits are the decisions that we are making to reach this node. So they are easily interpretable. But when we go with ensembles, that's not the case. They are not explainable. Why and how we come up with a particular prediction for a particular observation is practically unexplainable. Why it happens is we are not building one model, we are building hundreds of them and using weights to aggregate them. So we don't know what is the prediction given by each model for an observation, how this aggregation happens. So for ensemble techniques, the biggest disadvantage is the loss of explainability. But they are the ones that can give you very high efficient models. So in certain cases, when do we go for a ensemble model versus when do we go for a individual model? There are certain cases where you would go with individual model, especially when you have to explain how the predictions are being derived. But there are certain cases where nobody cares how the predictions are being derived. They just want to be as accurate as possible. Healthcare is a good example, right? In healthcare, you can have hundreds of data points, hundreds of variables that are being collected to diagnose or to predict some rare types of diseases. Nobody would question why a particular person is diagnosed with or predicted with a particular disease as long as we are accurate. You have to be accurate, right? So to achieve those exceptional accuracies, definite choices is going with the boosting technique. So in the industry, 80% of the time when we need to achieve exceptional accuracies, exceptional efficiency of the model, not just only accuracy, the first choice for the people is boosting. So that's why boosting is the heavily used algorithms in the industry. So it takes time to understand and master them. I am not denying the fact that a high level introduction like this is not sufficient enough. More practice is required, more understanding is required, going in depth into some of those concepts, etc. But boosting is the most important algorithm or set of algorithms if you have to even have a slightest chance of becoming a data scientist. So I'm just stressing upon the importance so that people understand, hey, boosting is one of the main skill set in our arsenal if we have to really become a data scientist, and use practicing how to use boosting and knowing what each parameter does, mastering it is more important for you if you are thinking of taking the data science journey. Okay, so let's pause here, see if there are any questions. Okay. Oh, my YouTube link. I don't have, but you can look at this. We'll be posting some more videos like gradient descent, some of those optimization techniques, different loss functions, etc. I'm planning to do some of those videos. We'll see. Okay, but let's stick to the questions, then we can talk about the other things. Practice is the key for data science. This is just a high-level introduction for tree-based models. And I again already explained you the reason for choosing this as a topic. These are the heavily used ones in the industry. Most of the time, we rely on the tree-based models. So this high-level introduction just sets you onto the path of learning this. It would take a lot of time to master any of this. So you have to do practice by taking some examples, understanding with the different types of data sets, how each of these algorithms are making predictions. So try to practice as much as possible until you master them. Any questions? I know this is a very tough topic, especially boosting is not something that would be easy for beginners to pick up so fast. You need to listen to this again. It would be very, very helpful if you can start practicing with a particular exercise. Each variant of boosting will be slightly different from each other. The biggest difference from one variant to another variant will be the available loss functions, the available cost functions, and optimization methods. That's one thing. Two, objectives. For example, in gradient boosting, we have only classification and regression that can be done. In XGBoost, we have more loss functions, we have more optimization functions, and at the same time, we have different objectives. We can do something called as ranking also over there. Ranking is a very rare topic in data science. We don't do that very often, but it is capable of doing ranking as well. Applications in real life, it depends on industry. As I said, one of the common application in the industry is to find out customers leaving or customer attrition. If you know a particular customer is going to leave the business, you can try to take some action and try to retain them. So knowing who are the customers who will be leaving you ahead in time makes more sense for the business. So that's one of the main predictions that we do in the industry. Second one, let's say for identifying sales opportunities. Now, when you generate some lead data, you have some thousands of customers, potential customers, but you cannot focus on each and every potential customer. So what you do is first you would try to understand who are the customers who are likely to buy your product, and that is again by doing some sort of classification. So it will be different from one industry to another industry. In healthcare, it would be like predicting some disease, predicting an outcome, like if someone will get cured or not based on the information, etc., that is provided to you. In most of the customer industries, it would be to see how good a customer is in terms of they leaving the business. That's going to be the main application for all these classification models over there. Yeah, I will share this PPT and code along with the data set.
So any more participants, if you have any doubts, you can type in the chat box, or you can raise your hand so that I can unmute you. And the final feedback form is posted in the chat box. You can fill it.
Weak learner means individually it may not be able to really make great predictions. That's what the weak learner means. So we are just building a simple tree on the first data that we have. It has an accuracy of something like 60%. Individually, it's not great. So that is why the name weak learner.